Jung's most profound discovery wasn't about managing emotions. It was about women who possessed complete emotional sovereignty and why this inner strength made them psychologically unshakable. In his therapeutic work, Jung observed patients with what he termed emotional autonomy. Women who remained centered when criticized, unaffected by manipulation, and immune to the emotional drama that exhausted everyone around them. They never internalized others' judgments, never responded from a place of wounds, and seemed impervious to the triggers that controlled other women. Jung found this discovery revolutionary because these women hadn't suppressed their feelings or practiced emotional numbness. They had undergone a specific psychological awakening that made others' behavior irrelevant to their inner peace, granting them an extraordinary level of emotional freedom. Today, I'll reveal Jung's most transformative discovery about women who never get triggered and the psychological process he believed could make any woman completely unbothered by others' actions. The case that unveiled Jung's most significant discovery began with a patient he documented in his private journals, a successful businesswoman who sought his help in 1919, not because she was struggling, but because her complete emotional stability was making others uncomfortable. This woman, let's call her Helena, had built a thriving fashion empire in post-war Germany, but her associates were unsettled by her, not because she was harsh or cruel, but because nothing could upset her. Insults didn't wound her. Criticism sparked curiosity, not defensiveness. Betrayal intrigued her, rather than devastated her. Her husband brought her to Jung because he was convinced something was amiss. "Doctor," he said, "my wife doesn't get disturbed by anything. Yesterday, I accused her of caring more about her business than our marriage. She asked me 3 questions. Was I feeling neglected? What did I need from her? And whether we should discuss how to better support each other's goals?" But here's what Jung discovered that revolutionized everything. Helena wasn't emotionally disconnected. She wasn't avoiding anything. She had simply learned to recognize her triggers as mirrors reflecting aspects of herself she hadn't fully integrated. Jung termed this the inner mirror principle. Every person who upsets you is revealing something about your own unconscious patterns. The colleague who dismisses your contributions, they're reflecting your fear of not being valued. The friend who constantly cancels plans, they're mirroring your struggle with boundaries. The family member who questions your life choices, they're showing you your own self-criticism. Helena had mastered this principle after experiencing a devastating business betrayal 3 years prior. Her closest business partner had stolen her key clients and nearly destroyed her company. But instead of seeking revenge, Helena asked herself one question: what part of me is this person reflecting? The answer transformed her. Her partner's deceit reflected Helena's own tendency to ignore red flags. Her partner's greed mirrored Helena's suppressed fear of financial insecurity. Her partner's betrayal revealed Helena's own capacity for self-sabotage through misplaced trust. By acknowledging these shadow aspects instead of projecting them onto others, Helena had achieved what Jung called psychological sovereignty. She could observe other people's behavior as information about them, not attacks on her worth. Jung documented this process in what he called the shadow integration method. When someone triggers you, instead of reacting, you ask 3 questions. What behavior in this person am I judging most strongly? Where do I exhibit this same pattern, even subtly? What is this trigger teaching me about myself? Let me demonstrate how this works. Catherine, a marketing director, felt constantly triggered by her colleague Anna's need for constant validation during team meetings. Using Jung's method, she asked herself, what am I judging in Anna? Her need for approval. Where do I do this? She realized she often sought reassurance when feeling uncertain about her ideas. What was this teaching her? That her irritation with Anna was really frustration with her own approval-seeking behavior. Once Catherine owned this shadow aspect, Anna's behavior stopped bothering her. She could see it as Anna's insecurity, not a reflection of her own inadequacy. That's the power of the inner mirror. It transforms triggers into wisdom. But Jung's research revealed something even more profound. The women who achieved emotional sovereignty had discovered a psychological space that most people never access, the pause between provocation and response. Helena described this space to Jung. "Doctor, when someone criticizes me, I experience something remarkable. Time seems to expand. I can observe their words approaching me, but instead of penetrating my core, they remain suspended. In that moment, I have a choice. Do I absorb these words and make them my truth? Or do I allow them to pass through me?" Jung realized Helena had accessed what he called the conscious gap, a psychological space where intentional choice replaces automatic reaction. Most women experience trigger and response as one seamless event. But those with emotional sovereignty had learned to create conscious awareness between the trigger and their response. This discovery challenged everything psychology understood about feminine emotional nature. Society assumed women were naturally more reactive, that triggers inevitably led to emotional responses. But Jung's patients proved that with proper understanding, any woman could access this gap and choose her response. The technique Jung developed was elegantly simple, yet psychologically profound. He called it the witness protocol. When triggered, instead of immediately reacting, you step back and observe the trigger as if watching a film. You notice the other person's words, their energy, their emotional state. But most importantly, you witness your own internal response without becoming it. Jung documented numerous cases of women mastering this technique. Isabella, a teacher, learned to witness her principal's criticism without personalizing it. Instead of becoming defensive, she could observe his stress, his pressure from the school board, his own professional fears. From the witness position, she could respond with clarity rather than reactivity. The key insight Jung discovered was this: you are not your emotions. You are the consciousness that observes your emotions. When someone triggers upset in you, that upset is information, not identity. You can choose to explore it, learn from it, or simply let it flow through you. Helena had mastered this so completely that she described feeling psychologically transparent. "Other people's negativity passes through me like sunlight through crystal," she told Jung. She wasn't avoiding or suppressing anything. She was simply choosing not to identify with every emotional wave. But here's what Jung found most striking about this ability. Once women developed it, they often lost interest in the drama that consumed most of their peers. They stopped caring about being liked by everyone, winning social battles, or proving their worth through others' approval. This made them incredibly powerful, but also sometimes isolated them from those still trapped in reactive patterns. The witness protocol requires practice, but Jung found that most women could access the conscious gap within weeks of consistent application. The technique involves 3 steps. Pause when triggered and take a conscious breath. Observe the trigger and your response without judgment. Choose your action based on your values, not your emotional impulses. This isn't about becoming emotionally closed or detached. It's about becoming the author of your responses, rather than the victim of your reactions. Jung's research into emotional sovereignty revealed another striking pattern. Women who never got triggered had built what he called energetic boundaries around their psychological space. Unlike physical boundaries, these were invisible barriers that determined what could and couldn't affect their inner state. Helena explained her energetic boundaries to Jung. "Doctor, I learned that people can only disturb my peace if I grant them access. Their words, their actions, their emotions, these are external events. They only become internal experiences if I choose to invite them in." This concept revolutionized Jung's understanding of feminine psychology. Most women, he realized, had completely porous psychological boundaries. They absorbed others' emotions, took on their stress, and allowed external events to dictate their internal state. But those with emotional sovereignty had learned to create selective barriers. Jung documented 3 types of psychological boundaries his sovereign patients had developed. The first was the relevance filter. They had trained themselves to only internalize information that served their growth or goals. Everything else was acknowledged, but not absorbed. The second was the ownership boundary. They could distinguish between their emotions and other people's emotions. When someone was upset with them, they could see it as that person's emotional state, not their responsibility to fix or absorb. The third was the identity fortress. They had such a solid sense of self that external criticism couldn't shake their core identity. They could receive feedback without hearing judgments about their worth. But Jung discovered something fascinating about these boundaries. Women who developed them often became magnets for those who lacked them. Emotionally unstable people, energy vampires, and drama seekers were drawn to those with strong boundaries because they provided the stability these chaotic personalities craved. Helena experienced this constantly. "Doctor," she told Jung, "ever since I stopped reacting to provocation, people seem to work harder to provoke me. It's as if my calm disturbs them more than emotional reactions ever could." Jung realized this was because emotionally reactive people use others' responses to regulate their own emotional state. When Helena refused to provide that regulation, it forced others to confront their own psychological instability. The energetic boundary technique Jung developed involved 3 strategic elements. First, the emotional firewall. Before entering any social situation, you consciously decide which emotions you're willing to experience and which you'll observe but not absorb. Second, the response selection. You pre-decide how you'll handle common triggers. Instead of reacting in the moment, you're executing a pre-planned response based on your values. Third, the identity anchor. You maintain such a clear sense of who you are that external opinions become interesting data rather than threats to your self-concept. Let me show you this in action. Rachel, a nurse, was constantly stressed by her demanding supervisor. Using Jung's energetic boundary method, Rachel implemented an emotional firewall before each shift. She decided she would observe her supervisor's stress, but not internalize it. She pre-selected calm, professional responses to criticism. And she anchored her identity in her competence and compassion, not her supervisor's approval. Within weeks, Rachel reported feeling untouchable at work. Her supervisor's moods no longer affected her performance or well-being. But more importantly, her supervisor began treating her with more respect, as if sensing Rachel's newfound psychological strength. This is the paradox Jung discovered about energetic boundaries. The stronger your boundaries, the more others naturally respect them. People can sense psychological strength and typically adjust their behavior accordingly. But Jung's most profound discovery about emotional sovereignty involved what he called projection insight. His sovereign patients had learned to see through others' emotional attacks to the psychological wounds driving them. Helena demonstrated this principle during one of Jung's sessions. A business rival had publicly humiliated her, calling her a cold, calculating woman who sacrificed femininity for success. Instead of hurt or defensiveness, Helena felt compassion. "Doctor," Helena said, "this woman's attack revealed everything about her psychology and nothing about mine." Her accusation of coldness showed her own fear of being seen as unfeeling. Her focus on my success exposed her own professional frustrations. Her criticism of my femininity revealed her struggle with her own feminine identity. Jung realized Helena had mastered what he called psychological insight, the ability to see through surface attacks to underlying emotional dynamics. When someone attacks you, they're always revealing something about themselves, not defining something about you. This discovery was profound because it meant most interpersonal conflict was based on psychological projection. Women weren't really fighting each other. They were fighting projections of their own unresolved issues onto each other. Jung documented the pattern repeatedly. Criticism about your appearance comes from those insecure about their looks. Attacks on your success come from those frustrated with their achievements. Judgments about your choices come from those questioning their own decisions. But here's what Jung found most remarkable. Once you could see these projections clearly, it became nearly impossible to take personal attacks personally. You started feeling compassion for the emotional pain driving others' aggression. Helena described this shift. Doctor, when someone attacks me now, I see a wounded woman protecting herself through aggression. How can I be upset with someone for trying to heal their pain? Instead, I feel curious about what hurt them and whether I can offer support. This is the ultimate psychological sovereignty Jung discovered. When you can see others' attacks as expressions of their pain, rather than assessments of your worth, you become completely unbothered by their behavior. The projection insight technique involves 3 diagnostic questions when someone attacks you. What quality are they criticizing in me? Where might they struggle with this same quality? What pain or fear might be driving this attack? Let me demonstrate this with a real example. Sophie, a freelance photographer, was devastated when a client called her work completely unprofessional and amateurish. Using projection insight, she asked, "What are they attacking?" "My professionalism. Where might they struggle with this?" She remembered the client mentioning feeling like a fraud in their industry. What pain drives this? Fear of their own unprofessionalism being exposed. This insight transformed Sophie's response. Instead of taking the criticism personally, she could see it as the client's projection of their own professional insecurities. She addressed their concerns professionally while maintaining her inner peace. But Jung warned about a potential side effect of mastering projection insight. Once you could see through everyone's psychological defenses, maintaining authentic relationships became challenging. You might feel like you were surrounded by wounded children rather than equal adults. Helena experienced this isolation. Doctor, sometimes I feel like I'm the only adult in a room full of hurt children. I can see everyone's pain so clearly that I struggle to take any of their behavior seriously. Jung realized this was the price of psychological sovereignty, clarity about human nature that could lead to detachment from human drama. The key was learning to see others' pain without losing compassion for their experience. Jung's final discovery about emotional sovereignty was perhaps the most transformative of all. His patients hadn't just learned to avoid being triggered. They had developed what he called emotional transformation, the ability to convert every trigger into psychological wisdom. Helena explained this process. Doctor, I no longer see difficult people as obstacles to avoid. I see them as teachers, bringing me exactly the lessons I need for my growth. The more someone can trigger me, the more valuable they are to my development. This represented a complete reversal of normal feminine psychology. Instead of avoiding triggers, Helena actively embraced them as opportunities for growth. Instead of seeing difficult people as enemies, she saw them as unconscious allies in her psychological evolution. Jung realized this was the ultimate stage of emotional sovereignty, transforming every external challenge into internal advancement. His sovereign patients had learned to use other people's negativity as fuel for their own psychological development. The process Helena described was systematic. When triggered, instead of reacting or even just observing, she would immediately ask, "What is this person teaching me about myself? What weakness are they exposing that I need to strengthen? What shadow aspect are they forcing me to integrate?" But here's what Jung found most remarkable. This level of psychological development created women who were nearly impossible to manipulate, control, or defeat emotionally. They had transformed every potential vulnerability into a source of strength. You already possess this truth intuitively. External validation cannot inflate you because you don't depend on it. External criticism cannot deflate you because you transform it into growth. You have the capacity to become emotionally invulnerable, not through walls, but through the transformation of turning every challenge into wisdom. This emotional transformation involved 3 processes. First, trigger wisdom, actively extracting valuable insights from every person who disturbed your peace. Second, shadow integration, using others' behavior to identify and heal your own psychological patterns. Third, strength synthesis, converting every discovered vulnerability into a developed strength. Let me show you this process in action. Maria, a team leader, was constantly triggered by her colleagues gossiping and complaining. Instead of just managing her reaction, she used emotional transformation. She asked, "What is their gossiping teaching me? That I judge others for needing connection and validation through shared grievances. What weakness does this expose? My own need to feel superior through judgment? What strength can I develop? The ability to create positive connection that fulfills their need for bonding." Maria transformed her trigger into a growth opportunity. She studied team dynamics, learned to channel her colleagues' social energy into collaborative projects, and became one of the company's most effective leaders. Her trigger became the catalyst for her greatest professional development, but Jung warned about the shadow side of emotional transformation. Women who mastered it sometimes became so focused on their own growth that they lost empathy for those still struggling with basic emotional regulation. They could become psychologically superior and emotionally distant. Helena experienced this. "Doctor, sometimes I feel like I'm conducting a psychology experiment rather than living a human life. Every interaction becomes a chance to study human nature rather than connect with another woman." Jung realized the final challenge of emotional sovereignty was maintaining humanity while achieving psychological transcendence. The goal wasn't to become invulnerable, but to become anti-fragile, stronger and more compassionate through every challenge. As Jung wrote, "The acceptance of oneself is the essence of the whole moral problem and the epitome of a whole outlook on life." True sovereignty required accepting both strength and vulnerability. The ultimate stage of emotional transformation involved what Jung called compassionate sovereignty, using your psychological strength to uplift others rather than to distance yourself from them. Helena eventually learned to use her sovereignty not as a shield, but as a bridge, helping other women develop their own emotional resilience. Jung's final observations about emotional sovereignty revealed its ultimate purpose, not to escape human connection, but to engage with it from a position of psychological strength. He called this stage the compassionate queen, someone who could remain untriggered while still caring deeply about others. Helena's transformation into a compassionate queen happened gradually. Initially, her sovereignty created distance between her and other women. People found her unshakable calm intimidating, even threatening. But Jung helped her understand that true emotional sovereignty included the ability to make others feel safe and understood. "Doctor," Helena reflected, "I realized my sovereignty was incomplete if it only protected me. True strength means creating space for other women to feel their emotions without judgment while maintaining my own center." Jung documented how Helena learned to use her emotional sovereignty in service of others. When her sister expressed frustration, instead of remaining unmoved, she could hold space for her feelings without absorbing them. When her employees brought her problems, she could listen with full presence without taking on their stress. This is the paradox Jung discovered about ultimate emotional sovereignty. It requires maintaining your humanity, not transcending it. The compassionate queen can feel others' pain without suffering, witness others' chaos without becoming chaotic, and offer support without becoming depleted. The technique I developed from Jung's observations involved emotional Aikido, using the energy of others' emotions to help them, rather than resisting or absorbing that energy. When someone brings you anger, you redirect it toward solutions. When someone brings you sadness, you transform it into compassion. When someone brings you fear, You alchemize it into wisdom. Helena mastered this so completely that women began seeking her out during their most difficult emotional crises. Her presence alone seemed to calm others' inner storms. But she achieved this not through emotional detachment, but through emotional mastery, feeling everything but being controlled by nothing. Jung's final notes on Helena revealed the ultimate secret of emotional sovereignty. She has learned to love others' humanity while remaining untouchable by their chaos. This is perhaps the highest achievement of feminine psychology. Complete vulnerability combined with complete invulnerability. The businesswoman who couldn't be bothered became Jung's greatest case study in feminine psychological potential. Helena proved that emotional sovereignty isn't about becoming cold or detached. It's about becoming so psychologically strong that you can remain warm and connected even in the midst of others' emotional storms. Jung's profound discovery about women who never get triggered revealed the ultimate truth about feminine nature. We are not victims of our emotional reactions. With the right understanding and practice, any woman can develop the psychological sovereignty that makes others' behavior irrelevant to her inner peace. The path Helena traveled, from shadow integration through energetic boundaries, to emotional transformation, and finally to compassionate queen, represents the complete journey of psychological development that Jung believed every woman could achieve. Today you've learned the psychological techniques that Jung documented in his most private case studies. The inner mirror that transforms triggers into teachers. The conscious gap that gives you choice over your responses. The energetic boundaries that protect your psychological space. The projection insight that helps you see through others' attacks. The emotional transformation that turns every challenge into growth. And finally, the compassionate queen that maintains humanity while achieving sovereignty. Jung's most profound discovery wasn't that some women never get triggered. It was that this ability reveals the vast psychological potential lying dormant in every woman. The question isn't whether you can develop emotional sovereignty. The question is whether you're ready to claim the psychological power that Jung proved belongs to you. Remember Helena's final insight. Doctor, I learned that true strength isn't about what can't touch you. It's about what you can touch without being changed by it. Your journey to emotional sovereignty starts now. Every trigger you encounter is a teacher. Every difficult person is a mirror. Every challenge is an opportunity for psychological transformation. The only person who can disturb your peace is the person you haven't fully understood, yourself. Take Jung's profound discovery and make it your liberating truth. You have the power to never be triggered by anyone again. See you in the next dimension of feminine power.